Well, maybe we should want to be true to time here and be respectful of everybody's schedule. So, welcome to our webinar. This is going to be a great conversation. Please comment. Please add to the conversation if you guys have questions, declarations, comments on what we're discussing here. Please share them with us. I'll be watching for some questions, and we'll do our best to answer everything individually as we can. This is a discussion on exit strategies and a kind of just a roundtable mastermind conversation on what's possible for a dentist to be taking the next step, whatever that may be. And we'll spend a little bit of time on what those things may be. Why don't we go around? We've got Cecilia Chen here and Christy Conway. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves if you don't mind. And our last presenter, Peter Chong, is with Huntington Practice Finance, and he's going to be on here in just a second. But Christy, can you tell us who you are and what you're passionate about?
Sure. Christy Conway with Schein Dental, and I'm in the practice transition group. I've been with Schein for over 20 years now, and I have been in this transition role for the last 2. So I'm a licensed real estate agent, and I'm able to help practices do valuations and transition and sell out of their practices. And what I'm passionate about, travel, golf, and my 4 girls. Cecilia, you're up.
Great. Well, thank you for having me tonight. My name is Cecilia Chen. I am an attorney. I specialize in representing dentists in practice startup, transition transactions, partnerships, associate agreements, representing clients selling to DSOs. About 90% of my clients are dentists. I've been practicing since 2004. And I've been focusing in the dental healthcare niche since 2011. So I've done a lot of these transactions, and I'm excited to, share my experience and, tonight and kind of, have a great conversation about how to make your future, transition transaction a smooth and easy one. I'm based here in San Diego, California, but I work with clients all over the state and many out of state as well.
Right on.
And I'm passionate about, I recently joined a climbing gym, and that's my latest passion. I'd love to go climbing anytime I can.
Right on. Well, I'm Landon Libby. I'm a practicing dentist here in San Diego, and I love what I do. I get to sit knee to knee with people every day and help them get what they want. And I've been practicing for 12 years now. I went to Loma Linda University, School of Dentistry, great experience there, and started my practice from scratch in 2015 here after working with a great mentor. And I love the business of dentistry and the hustle of it. And so I've purchased several practices since I started mine and merged them into mine and kind of I love the game of that. And so this is a good conversation. We have different viewpoints from all over the industry. So it's going to be, I want to hear from all of us, mainly you guys, on the different points and where you see and where you come at them from those different angles. So I want to, while Peter's waiting to get on here, and I hope he can, Christy, we kind of mentioned, what does it mean to exit in dentistry? Dentists are type A personalities. We're really control freaks. We tend to be. And the model before, up until now, the private practice model was ideal because it was like, hey, this is my little business, and and I'm gonna treat people great, and I'm gonna take care of my team, and I'm gonna do this for an entire career, and then I'm going to what? And the problem with it is that that's not a problem, but it is very, very focused on that person, on that dentist. And you're seeing, Christy, that tell us what you're seeing when we try to define what does it mean to exit. What are you seeing now that that's coming up?
Sure. So when you're ready to exit, it doesn't mean that you're done with dentistry forever. And it doesn't mean that you need to wait till the very, very end in order to do that. We're seeing people exit at a lot earlier stage. And it doesn't mean, really it means they're exiting from the business side of it, because you like the business side of dentistry, but not all dentists do like the business side of that dentistry. You hardly get any business classes when you're in dental school, and yet you're here running your own business. So there are a lot of different ways that you can exit now. We have DSOs that can come in and take over for you, but that means you're going to be working back for somebody else. You can sell your practice to a private doctor. Kind of gone are the times where that associate comes in and, stays with you for a long time and eventually transitions and buys your practice. Those associates are my best buyers. They're in these practices going, well, he or she isn't moving on anything, and they said they're going to sell to me, but I don't know when, so I'm ready to buy a practice now. So those associates are buying those practices, and the seller can work back at a reduced amount of time. That's where the goodwill is really transferred over. And if there's no room in that practice to work back, you can go become an associate really anywhere out of the non-compete area, and anybody would love to have you. You've got your speed up. You can practice 1 or 2 days a week. You're not a threat to that doctor. You're not going to open up your own practice and steal the patients. You're ideal. So it really looks different than what it used to. But I think the main thing is that you have to prepare. You have to think about that, because a lot of times I get people that call me really too late when they've already kind of, I used to produce this and I used to collect this. Well, but now you're not. Now you kind of dug the practice into the ground and you're only working 3 days a week. There's not as much profitability. There's a host of issues when you wait too long and you don't prepare.
Yeah, there's interesting because a dentist who has his business that he's built, and it's built around him and his services. What I'm seeing is young doctors are coming in just eager to, like, hey, I'm going to work for 5 years or more. There's not a lot of patience for that, right? And then on the other side, a doctor who has been doing this for 30 years is very hesitant to communicate that plan or develop a plan with that associate. And so there's a disconnect in the communication of, like, well, what do you want? What do you want? How can we make both of those work together? So having it where it's having a plan, and that's what we're talking about now, and being able to communicate that right off the bat. Like for me, like I'm already communicating that when somebody starts with me, is like, hey, this is my vision. And I feel like the quicker we can communicate that to the people around us, whoever that may be, the more opportunity it creates to go, oh yeah, I align with that vision. That sounds like let's team up and make this work. Cecilia, are you you're working a lot with different clients who are kind of exiting on different spectrums. What is the leading reason that people come to you and say, this is the reason why I'm coming to you, this is the reason why I'm looking to do something else or transition out of this role?
Well, I think, most of the selling clients that I work with, obviously they're looking to transitioning because, they're looking to retire or move to another state. And and one of the things I I wish or have a health issue. And one of the things that I wish that dentists do, not just older dentists, but everybody, to have a plan in place until not to wait until there's a health issue or need to move to another state or need to cut back and have the production go down significantly. And because none of us know what tomorrow might be, right? Even younger dentists, they can go into a routine surgery and not come back out. And so it really is important to, not just have an exit plan and a vision, like what you said about, what my vision is for my practice. Is my plan to, have multiple offices, have partnerships, and have to sell to DSO in the near future, or sell to a private buyer, whatever that plan might be. There's a legal step that a lot of people don't think about, which is to set up a trust, to have those legal documents in place, so that if something were to happen to somebody unexpectedly, then the surviving spouse, the family can transition your practice or help execute your vision quickly, without your practice being tied up in a probate process for a really, really long time, and losing value for the practice, and patients leave to go elsewhere, or or have people take advantage in situations like that. And with proper planning, that shouldn't happen. And also, in addition to just have a trust in place, to know who in your life that you want to appoint and that you trust to manage and sell your practice or help execute your vision in the event of unexpected. Right. And that person might or might not be your spouse or your immediate family, because you have to consider that your spouse and immediate family will be going through the grieving process of you passing away. And even if it's completely expected, it's still going to be a difficult process. So, would that person have, the business, the ability to make decisions, business decisions on how to execute your vision, how to, hire the right people to transition your practice, and be in an emotional state to, to know what's going on, what's important, the right steps to take, and hire the right advisors, etc.
Yeah, you're bringing up an amazing, different perspective than is the planning of the unexpected,
Right.
And we're all powerful until we're not, and I love what you said when you're kind of like, hey, we need to be setting ourselves up for not just a planned exit strategy, but if something happens, again, like, I don't want this all built around me and my name on everything to where it's an absolute mess if something does happen. So when a client comes to you, like, step number one is to set up a trust.
Yeah, definitely.
And
Definitely.
when are you seeing people come to you? Like, when should a doctor come to you to be able to do that? The sooner the better.
I tell my young buyer clients to, after the closing, after they become a practice owner. And many of my buyer clients, not only are they entering into practice ownership, but they're also starting a new family. They have young kids. Even without owning a practice, it's you got to take those steps to protect your practice, protect your family, and have there. I don't think there is a time that's too young to to set up a trust, to set up a plan. for both your practice and for your family.
We did that just recently. Sorry, Christy, I'm gonna let you go, but it was funny when the question that my wife and I got hung up on was if we both die, who takes all of our kids, you know? And it was amazing. It was a hard process to set up those decisions, because you're thinking about if we both die,
Right.
like who's going to raise our kids. But it is amazing because it gets you you gain a ton of clarity going through those conversations.
Right. And who's going to sell your practice? Right. You know, especially somebody who, you know, who has maybe not having a surviving spouse, or having a surviving spouse, but not have the capacity to really make any decisions because they have health issues or dementia or have Alzheimer, but you have multiple adult children, and how are they going to come to a decision?
Yeah.
On things. Who's going to be able to execute things, right? So
Cecilia is very important point about the trust. On my side, the first step for me to be able to sell a practice in the case of something like that is to have a valuation in place. Hands down, that is everyone's number one step. In addition to having to trust, you have to know what the value of your practice is. And the value of your practice is not just a percentage of collections. It's not. We can have two practices, both collecting $1 million. One has an overhead of 50%, one has an overhead of 70%. Are they both going to be valued at 75%? No. So our valuation process is 4 years past tax returns, 4 years P&Ls, 4 years production collection reports. It is an in-depth process where we have a lot of documents that we are gathering together. It's a lot of back and forth between our valuation team, finding what add backs are there, really coming up with what that cash flow would be for a potential buyer. Once that valuation is in place, I always tell my clients that it's a great starting point. Everyone needs to know this. You need to do it for estate planning, for like the just in case that Cecilia is referring to. And you also need to do it for your retirement planning. You might think you know what your practice is worth. So I don't want you to come to me right before you're ready to sell. I'm going to have to value your practice at that time too. But I want you to come to me like 5 years before. And at that time, we run your numbers, we do the valuation. If you like where that number is when it comes back, great. Keep doing what you're doing. But if you feel that foot's going to come off that pedal and slow down, you know the value is also going to go down at the same time. If we get that value back and you don't like what it is, great. You now have 5 years to make changes. To fix it. So by doing that valuation and taking that really important step, it's a good learning process for you to really get familiar with all your numbers. You know, a lot of the business owners, they run all their personal expenses through there. So it really kind of helps us clean up the financials, know what's really going on in the practice, know what that looks like for a potential buyer. But I will tell you an example of a case that came in this year is that a doctor did a valuation with me. He went in for surgery and unfortunately passed. Because I had that valuation in place and he had told his office manager, if anything happens to me, call Christy, we were able to list that practice in 1 day. I can't tell you the amount of documents I need to be able to list your practice. It's a lot. I had everything I needed. I needed a few updated reports from Dentrix. I was good to go. We had a showing within 2 days, and we had 5 full price and over asking offers within 3 days. That does not happen. That is the perfect case scenario for how that can go down. For every day that practice sits on the market, your value is going down and down and down and down. It's the best service you can do to be prepared for your family to have all of that in place, to have your valuation done, to be very clear on who to call when this happens, and that can be defined in that trust, but not just tell one person in your family, tell multiple people in your family what your plans are, because greed and grief They all don't mix very well, and that's a very stressful situation. I don't want to be talking with your family at that time. Cecilia is right that it's nice to have someone maybe a little bit removed who can handle that, because I'm going to need things quick and we're going to need to get that sold for the sake of your family. So those are very, very important points, the valuation and the trust.
And I like what you said about the valuation, getting the valuation 5 years before or years before. And if you don't like it, then you have all that information and that data and that knowledge to be able to make the changes to get it to where you would like it to be. And do you recommend valuing a practice like every certain amount of timeline? Like if somebody does not know the valuation of their practice, they haven't gone through what you would take them through. Is it like every 2 years, or is it just do it once and then you can track it from then on?
Everyone should have one basic, right? Whether you're ready to sell, not ready to sell, as that just in case. Everyone needs to have that. I don't recommend, you don't have to do it every couple of years. If you have some major changes that occur in your practice, let's circle back, let's value it again. Yeah. But as long as you have one in place, we have a baseline. Now, every 4 years, all those documentations, right, are going to be not relevant anymore. So we do need about every 4 years to kind of update all your financials, because a lot of times either we can't get it from the CPA, or we don't have access or permission to get that from the bookkeeper, the CPA, whatever it is. We need to have all those documents ready to go.
Yeah. So the question of when you should start planning your exit strategy is define and be able to clearly communicate your own vision of what you want. Develop your trust or your legal documents that put other people on make them aware of what would happen if something happens, or even if you were going to sell Cecilia. Let's move past the unexpected passing away of a dentist, but even they have the trust set up, they have the legal documents. How does that benefit them when they are going to value their practice and put it on the market? Is there a lot of benefit that you see in having all of that pre-set up?
Well, I mean, the trust definitely. I mean, are you asking in the context of how setting up the trust benefits?
Well, like selling, if a practice is in a trust, does it make it how is the process different if you're selling the practice to another buyer, if it's in the trust or if it's not in the trust, from your opinion?
It's not that different. It's not that different at all.
Okay.
There's no difference. The only thing is it protects, the unexpected event of, like, even if in the middle of escrow and everything's fine, and then something happens, and then that will derail the entire process. Yeah. And because all of a sudden, without a trust, you have to go through the probate court to figure out who has the authority to sign all of these legal documents, who can continue the process. And unfortunately, the probate process can take more than a year at this point. And it's not as simple as, I have a spouse who can just step in. No, that spouse has to be granted legal authority by the probate court, right, to execute legal documents on behalf of your estate. So, those things can take time. And, sometimes I'm sure there are ways to get things expedited, but, it takes time and it takes money, and it's just a lot more stress and money and work that's involved that, hopefully that can be avoided with proper planning.
Yeah. So how does somebody know what their practice is truly worth? Christy, you touched on this a little bit ago. How would I know how much my practice is worth? What goes into that?
So the valuation process, I kind of already talked about how many documents we ask for. It really is a matter of collections and cash flow. So not just the percentage of collections. That cash flow, we really need to know for a new buyer coming in, what are they truly going to be responsible for? So when we have our practice profiles that we provide buyers after they sign the NDAs, we have an estimated cash flow sheet. It's usually the first document that the buyers go to. They want to see at the end of the day, after they are, paying the mortgage payment for purchasing your practice, what's left over for them. That's what the lender is also looking at for these new buyers. Every buyer gets pre-qualified. Peter, whoever the lender is going to look and make sure they have enough liquidity, making sure that they are able to purchase a practice. But then they have to match the buyer's financials with the seller's financials. And that's the process of underwriting.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, it's really seeing, is this practice, now it doesn't matter on potential. I feel like the biggest thing that sellers say to me is, but I used to do this. But if they just bring specialty in again and do this, it can be $1 million practice all over again. The lender's not going to lend on what you used to do or what you could do. It's lending on what you are doing right now. So that cash flow has to be able to support this new dentist who has dental school debt. They have their family expenses. We live in San Diego. I need a strong cash flow number in order to be able to sell a practice quickly. That's another question a lot of people ask. How long is this process going to take me? It all depends on a lot of things. If I have a practice that is in the right location, has the right number of operatories, that being 5 or more, so many of my practices, and we have a lot of 3 and 4 practices here in San Diego. They want more than that nowadays. So you have updated equipment and technology. You can tell me all those things, but until I see what your cash flow is, I can't tell you how quick it's going to be to sell your practice. I had a practice earlier this year who had all those things in very strong cash flow. We had an open house. We had multiple offers. Seller picked his favorite one, 60-day escrow, and we were closed. It can be that simple if they've planned ahead and they have all those good things. He had invested in his practice. I don't want you to go invest in your practice right before you're going to sell. It's not like real estate. I can't get you a dollar for dollar return on what you invest in. But I also need to have you updated enough that a new buyer, after buying your practice, isn't going to then have to get more financing because, God forbid, you don't have digital technology. There's still some practices in San Diego that do not have digital technology, or you haven't updated your computers yet, whatever that is. They look at that as, well, I'm also going to have to invest all this money in the practice. So that's just too much for me.
Yeah.
So it's very important what that valuation is and that you're very aware that we need strong cash flow in order to sell your practice.
Cash flow is king. Yeah, it has to be able to support. And then if I'm an older doctor, I'm looking to exit out of my office or transition, how important is it of who I'm looking for? Is that come up a lot of like somebody who's like-minded? Because every dentist wants their practice, their patients to be taken care of. And oftentimes I've seen that we have that intention and then it gets to the point where somebody, a buyer buys it that their mindset and their values may not be similar. And are you factoring that a lot? And you mentioned that he picked his favorite buyer.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, about personality and matching up with somebody.
So I make my sellers interview. Some sellers want to be a part of the process and want to be there at the open house so they can meet the buyers as they come in. Others say, no, you show it and then let me know from there. In that case, I had 3 offers. I made him interview each one and then he picked. I had another scenario where they had 4 offers and immediately he said, I'm going to pick the highest one. And I said, you're not. You're first going to talk to them all and then you're going to tell me which one. He didn't pick the highest one. The highest one didn't want him to stay on, didn't match and align with what his values were. So it's really important that the seller can be, this is your practice. You can be as involved or not as you want to be, but I absolutely suggest being involved in the process.
Yeah. And what is I think Peter's on here, so he can add to this, but what is the ideal size practice that makes it the most sellable or transitionable? Like, do you see a number, like a practice that's doing this much in revenue, more people are able to purchase that? And Peter can touch on this, but what are you seeing is like kind of that most sellable range in there, and what might be something that's too big for another private doctor to buy?
So in between, if the sales price is in between 500 and $1 million, that's our sweet spot right there, like the 750 range. A lot of people can qualify for that. Peter can speak to more of that. When we get over that $1 million price tag, our buyer pool shrinks a little bit. Not everyone can afford a practice like that. Some buyers are looking for the underperforming practice. Others are like, $1 million practice, that's all I'm looking for. I'm not going to go build it. I want it already built for me. So we do have a range of that, but I'd say the 750 is probably the sweet spot as far as what we list the practice for. Peter, are you with us?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yay.
Okay, sorry for all the technical difficulties, but yeah, just to jump in on that, Christy's spot on. I see requests all the time, and it's either for the sweet spot of what Christy mentioned, or a lot of underperforming practices we do see out there. But I think from a seller's perspective, when you have a high production practice, I would categorize something north of $1 million, 1.5, $2 million. They're fantastic practices. They cash flow great, right? But I think where we run into the issue, where, as Christy mentioned, that buyer pool shrinks, is when it comes to hand speed and the production ability of the doctor. And I think there's a lot of things about dental lending that is subjective, and that is probably one of the most subjective topics. And not saying banks have the right recipe of figuring out what the hand speed of a potential first time owner is. We try to quantify that as best as we possibly can through historical earnings or the production ability, if they can show their production reports. But even with that, oftentimes when you're working as an associate, it's not an ideal scenario, right? You may not be getting the cases that you want to treat. Your schedule might not be ideal. So we understand that it may not be entirely accurate, but oftentimes those higher production practices, we're looking for those super GPs or doctors who are just producing, through the roof, to be able to translate the seller's clinical responsibility to them. And so you're oftentimes those higher production practices will be purchased by those few that are producing quite a bit, or existing practice owners, right, as a second, third, or fourth office.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And yeah, so I got caught thinking about all that. Yeah, hand speed. Because really a value of a practice comes down to, is that new seller that you are looking to sell your practice to going to be able to match what you're doing? And there's value added there with specialty, like doing more. But honestly, that's easy to market as a value add, but then it's tougher as a practicing dentist if I'm purchasing a practice and it's like, oh, but there's no specialty being done here, it's all being referred out. Getting in front of as a buyer, if I buy that practice, it does take work and time to bring those treatments into the office, to discuss with the patients about, hey, we offer this here now. You've always gone to the oral surgeon across the way. But I'm, so I think that is, that can be kind of a misleading selling point is like, oh, there's no specialty work being done here, so it's going to add another $500,000 to this once you buy it. Are you seeing, so once they get up like a practice, if somebody's listening here and their practice is doing those higher numbers, 1.5 to 2 million, are you seeing many people, many young dentists qualifying for that? Or you mentioned like the main buyer for that would be like an existing dentist or a group. Are you seeing young dentists being able to come into a well-oiled machine like that?
I had a scenario last year. Doctor was 1 year out of school, so typically not an ideal candidate to be buying a high production practice. So initially, when he called me, my thoughts were, doctor, I don't think this is going to be the right fit. I think we'll run into a lot of trouble in underwriting. He had the liquidity requirements. Everything else, cash flow was great. What it came down to was it would have been very challenging for me to present and get the underwriter to buy into the fact that he would be able to, one, from a clinical perspective, be able to keep up with the production the seller was doing, but two, also it's a higher production office, which equates to more staff. It's a lot for somebody so new out of school to manage to. But this doctor was very adamant that he could do it. He had production reports. He was producing fantastic for that first year. So then, the more data he presented to me, he was kind of that unicorn situation where it made sense, So he started convincing me, and the more data he provided, I realized, okay, we have enough here to make a case, And that's where part of dental lending is interesting. The story matters, right? The story and the data you present. If you can convince me, then that allows me to convince the underwriter, right? So we took that deal to underwriting. And there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of conversation, but ultimately we did do that deal. And fast forward, I think he's about 11 months into ownership. He's probably doing, I would say, around 115% of what the previous owner was collecting. So, he was very confident. I think a lot of it comes down when I talk to a buyer. I'll ask them simple questions like, why do you want to buy this practice? Like, well, why is this a good fit? Why? And if they can articulate that to me, other than the fact that it's a great cash flowing office and they like where it's located, but if they can articulate the reasons why they think they can do it, and then sometimes it is a fit. But for the most part, it is challenging for someone fresh out of school, right, to be able to get the financing for a practice like that. Outside of their hand speed ability, they just haven't had enough time to build up their reserves and their liquidity to be able to qualify as well, which is a huge metric that we look at.
Yeah, because a $2 million practice is the reason why it's collecting that is because of the amazing team that's there, the support of around the doctor, right? So the productivity of an office like that really has to do with our ability to produce that. But you get up to those numbers because you've built systems and procedures and protocols and a team around you that is making this whole thing flow, which is an ideal position for a young dentist to be in, right? Whereas if you have lower producing offices, you typically may be walking into a team that you're going to reorganize in some way, shape, or form. So it's interesting the different your perspective and Christy's on kind of what that sweet spot is. So thank you for that. Cecilia, what is what type of fees and commissions, and from your legal perspective, like if somebody's looking to transition out of their office, what could they expect in terms of the fees that are associated with that?
Like for attorney, for legal stuff, or for broker.
From you, like for their legal stuff, what could they anticipate?
So, that's tough to say because every transaction is kind of different. One sale, every office can be very, very different in terms of, is it a general or specialty practice? Is it a partnership, or are you selling it to a partnership? Does the seller own the real estate? And does the seller, have multiple offices, right? Or, is the seller going to be working back? So, there are multiple different factors that go into a transaction. And a lot of times, the lease can be the most difficult aspect of the transaction to transfer. And that's something, that really, that needs to be part of the planning process to know what's in your lease and how that's going to impact you when you sell your practice. So, I mean, on average, it's difficult for me to say as far as, attorney's fee and is concerned, but probably on average, there are attorneys out there that charge, more than $10,000 just to do a purchase agreement and to, handle the lease. So, but I would say probably, there is a wide range on fees. The important thing to look for in attorney specifically is whether that attorney has the experience and knowledge to handle your transaction. Oh, and if you're selling, whether you're selling to a private buyer or to a DSO. I know to a DSO, the process is significantly more complex than selling to a private buyer. So, that range is also a huge wide range. But again, the real important thing to focus on really is, what's that attorney's experience and knowledge in working on, in this field. And do they, if I'm selling to a DSO, do they have any experience in representing clients to selling to a DSO? I have a brother-in-law who is an attorney and who supposedly is a corporate attorney. Can he handle my transaction? Will he even?
The answer is no.
Yeah, thank you. Do they even know? Or worse, my brother-in-law is a litigation attorney, and they will litigate every single tiny issue out of like crazy, but actually not really understand the issues that are actually important in a dental transaction. And a lot of attorneys don't really who are not focused in this field. They're not going to know how certain issues are typically addressed, or how, when problems come up, how to come up with a compromise that takes into account of both parties' concerns based on the experience and knowledge of handled hundreds of these transactions. Anybody can come up with a contract based on a template. That template actually address your specific practice, your specific concerns, and who, a lot of times I have clients even say, I'm working with a client right now who said that, they are using my agreement when they were buying a practice, because I represented her several years ago when she bought the practice, and now she's selling the practice, and she didn't think anything would need to change. And because I'm the one who drafted the agreement, and I said, no, actually, it's hugely different. First of all, a lot has changed in the past 8-9 years since we last worked together. Secondly, when I drafted that contract 8 years ago, you were the buyer. I put in all the language in there to protect you as a buyer. There's nothing in there that protects you as a seller. So even if a contract is drafted by an attorney, by the same attorney like me, it's hugely different whether you're the buyer, whether you're a seller, in your situation. A lot has changed. So, it really comes down to whether you should be focusing on, whether the person you're talking to has the experience and knowledge in handling your transaction. And no matter how simple you might think your transaction is, It really never is, because there's always some issue, whether it's with staff, whether it's with patient, whether it's with, if the seller has multiple offices, there are tons of hairy issues in there. And whether, you're selling to DSO, selling to a private buyer. And it's I guess I went down a tangent about I didn't really answer your question about
No, you
way of saying that it's a really difficult thing to say. Depends on the transaction.
Can I piggyback off of two things Cecilia said? One is I refer all of my sellers and buyers and really strongly recommend you have to work with a dental specific attorney. If you're not, that deal is not going to go through. Like it's just not. There's a lot of things in the escrow process that are what we call deal killers, and not having a dental specific attorney is probably the top one. Another very important point that Cecilia brought up in the escrow process is that lease. And I really, really want to stress this for everybody on this call. You need to know what is in your lease. You can come to me and everything in there is perfect. And I say, okay, what do we have left on our lease? Oh, I'm on month to month, or I have a year left, or whatever the answer is. Is it transferable? I don't know. I have no idea. All of those things you need to be aware of. Lenders nowadays, they require minimum 5 years lease, right? For a buyer to get financing. Now that number is growing. I have had so many deals this year that have fallen out of escrow due to the lease and the landlords. Had one just fall out of escrow. He had a 3-year lease with a 5-year option. The 3-year lease was transferable. The 5-year option was not.
Right.
The landlord refused to give that 5-year option. And as we pushed and said, we won't have funding, we have to have that, Mr. Landlord. And this was a mom and pop. Sometimes it's a corporation, sometimes it's a mom and pop. Mr. Mom and Pop landlord said, fine, pay me a large sum of money, largest sum I've ever heard of, and I'll give you a 5-year lease.
No, that's actually not the largest sum you have ever heard.
You've heard
I have had higher. Yep.
I thought it was a ridiculous amount of money. Should I just throw it out there? $150,000.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the buyer did? Ran for the hills. Okay? If you do not know what is in your lease, do not sign another lease without having a lawyer look over that. Please.
Not just the lease. Even if you already have an existing lease, you have leverage to negotiate when it's time to renew. So don't just sign on the dotted line and say, Mr. Landlord, I'm going to renew here. Tell me where to sign. Because a lot of times I've had a case where the renewal document, the actual original lease, was in good shape. The renewal document changed a lot of the key provisions in the lease, specifically regarding, the renewal rent. It was based on, before the original lease had the renewal rent at like 3% fixed. And then in the renewal document, it changed to market. Now, with the inflation, the market is significantly higher than the 3% that they were expecting, right? And then when the landlord understand the lease documents, renewal documents, they are drafted by the landlord's attorney, whose job is to make sure that the landlord is protected, like 150%. And it's your job to understand what you're assigning, what your rights and obligations are under the lease, when you are ready to renew your lease. That's a good opportunity to know what's in your lease and have things renegotiated and corrected so that it can be in a good shape to transfer to your future buyer.
Yeah. So let's you mentioned selling to a DSO is much more complicated. Let's talk about that, because there's a couple different options of, I'm going to sell my practice and I'm either going to work back or I'm going to be done completely. There's selling to a solo younger doctor. There is selling to a dental services organization, which is usually purchasing the entire practice, and then you work back as a 1099 employee as the dentist.
Or W-2 employee.
Or a W-2, exactly. There's group like SPP dental partners. There's groups that are partnership groups that talk about, from your guys' perspective, like what would a seller experience when they're looking at both of those options?
Do you want me to take it first?
Yeah. Do you want to go first?
Sure. I'll just talk in very general. Cecilia
Okay.
can talk more specifics. So you have those two options, right? Working back for a DSO. I tell my sellers there's pros and cons to both. There is definitely I'm going to get so much more. I'm going to get 5 times the amount if I sell to a DSO. That's not always what the case is. That's if everything works out as planned, you're only going to get about 80% cash up front, as opposed to selling to a private buyer where you're going to get your full asking price. A lot of times,
80%? Did you say 80% upfront?
Yeah, for DSO. Yes. What amount do you think? That's what the last deal I did was. What do you think?
80% is actually a high amount.
High amount.
Yeah.
You're gonna get a certain percentage up
Okay.
front,
Yeah.
and the rest of that
Earning
is gonna be tied in, whether it's an earnout, whether it's tied to the EBITDA. There's a lot of different things that go with that. A seller has to be prepared if they sell to a DSO that they're gonna stay in that practice and work back. DSOs ideally want 5 years. We've done deals where they'll just do 3. Like 3 is probably the most minimum that they will do. But going through with the private buyer can be a very simple process. Going through with the DSO, the process of escrow, it's very organized. There's weekly calls. There's a lot more to it on the DSO side. They know what they're doing. They've done these transitions before. So there's pros and cons to both. The documents are a lot more complicated, and I'll let Cecilia talk more about that with the DSOs.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest difference between selling to a private buyer versus DSO is that, if your objective is to be able to really retire and get out, DSO probably isn't the right buyer. Most DSO, I mean, I would say almost 95, more than 95% of the DSOs I have worked with, they all require the seller to stay on. That's their entire, model of acquiring practices. And the seller needs to stay on to work for a period of 3 to 5 years. And not only that, but to be able to meet the historical, revenue goals of the practice. And one of the tricky part is that, a lot of the sellers will think, well, yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. I have been meeting this historical revenue goal for the past, 20, 30 years. This is not going to be an issue. But you don't realize that when you are no longer the owner of the practice, you're going to lose a significant amount of control on decisions related to staff, decision related to insurance, decision related to, operating hours of the practice, a lot of many different things that once those things are not within your control, these things can have a significant impact on how you're, continue to operate your practice and your ability to meet those revenue goals. So, yeah, I mean, for selling to DSO, there are a lot more factors involved related to deferred purchase price that is tied to the revenue goals. A lot of times part of the purchase price is going to be converted to an equity interest in the DSO. It just depends on how the deal is negotiated. Sometimes it can be pretty simple, but most of those transactions I have handled. It's significantly more, difficult and complex than a transaction selling to a private buyer. And also the valuation is also different as well. Just touching on that quickly, the value, a valuation provided by a DSO buyer is going to be very different from a private buyer. Oftentimes it's a lot higher, but on the other hand, the requirement of getting that much higher purchase price is also very different from a private buyer. For instance, such as a lot of the purchase price is tied to meeting certain revenue goals, or part of the purchase price is related to the equity interest of the DSO, and how is that valued? How is the DSO actually well capitalized? So it can get it can get a lot more complicated than just selling to a private buyer.
So that's a good point. The one thing I'll say is I've been recently seeing a trend, especially in the specialty practice. I just saw an ortho office in Texas, a few oral surgery opportunities here in California, where they had decided and had found a potential buyer in the private space, and the valuation or what they were asking for was extremely rich, right? And so when I had an opportunity to speak to those sellers, I found out that they had received that valuation, and that was done by a DSO opportunity. And I had to explain to them that it's a much different scenario when you're asking for all of that money up front and you're trying to make that sale happen in the private space with a DSO valuation. The financing is a different path, and the way and the methodology that we look at it is going to be different as well. And there's going to be very, very far and few people that will be able to afford that in the private space or be able to finance that. So needless to say, those transactions didn't pan out and come to fruition, but taking a DSO valuation and bringing it into the private space, as attractive as that number is as a seller, that just won't work.
Yeah. And from a dentist perspective, I love, like, a dental practice is valued at a lot of the value is around my leadership and my abilities to, and my grit, and like it all stops with me. Like, if this is going to charge forward, like, let's go. And when you take that out of it, I think you lose something in a practice. And when you take skin in the game out of the doctor's hands, there's something lost there with the vibe of the office and the productivity and the vision moving forward. And when you sell, like, if you sell to a younger doctor and you two are like, you're the mentor and the mentee, and like, that's a drive forward of you to keep this going and get and push all the knowledge and leadership skills onto them so that they can thrive. Like, that's motivation. I feel like the DSO, where I'm going to sell my practice and I'm going to work back for 3 or 5 years, like you're talking, Christy, there's something changes there, because you've been taken out of the driver's seat of like this vision that you've had for decades in this practice, and they need you to stay on because they want you to continue what you're doing, but you're in a different space. And I think that's where the deferred payment comes along, is like, okay, we're going to give you this much now, and then if you prove that you can keep this going, we'll give you your full selling price at some later time. It doesn't sit well with me. Like, I think skin in the game, a dentist, a business owner has got to have that like pucker factor, that like, hey, if this is going to thrive and it's going to grow, like, it's on me. And there's a lot of man, a cool validation that comes out of that. And that's why I think dentists do tend to practice a long time, maybe even longer than they physically should, because there's so much validation in what they're doing and laying their hands on people and just taking care of people at the most intricate level. And I don't like that transition. Somebody that's been doing that for decades, and then they transition into somebody else is kind of setting the vision and calling the shots and changing a lot of things. Maybe I just don't hear very many wonderful stories of that.
Well, on the flip side, there is some advantages in, potentially a well-run, a well-managed DSO can take your practice to the next level, because they are the one focusing on, helping you to really actually realize your vision, and they have the higher, bigger buying power. So things cost less, such as, lab fees and supplies. And they are, they take away the aspect of, the difficult part of the practice, such as the staff, admin, marketing, to allow you to focus on the clinical side of the practice. So, there are definitely, when done correctly, and when partnered with the right, company, I do think it can definitely be mutually beneficial to both parties, and can be done very, very well.
I would agree with that. Speaking from the other side of things, there's not just like the big DSOs that we're used to hearing about. There's a lot more smaller boutique DSOs who are doing things differently because of the bad rap that the big DSOs have received. They are now recognizing, well, no, the seller wants to be a part of this and still wants that freedom to choose the way they're going to practice, what supplies they're going to order, and we're just here to support. So pros and cons to both. Lots of different types of DSOs out there, but there are advantages because not all dentists like or know how to do the business side of dentistry.
Yeah. And that's where SPP was born out of, was private practice doctors, but doing it together. And I was referring more to, I'm looking to get the most out of my practice, and I'm jumping into the wrong partnership with a DSO that has a different vision for you and your practice than you have always had.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of power in numbers, a lot of power in we can all do more together than we can alone. And it's really cool to see that. So we're coming up on our hour mark. Thank you for everybody being on here. What are some, we kind of talked about some specific steps that people could take right now. We talked about this at the beginning. Peter, can you share, like, what is something that a dentist who is looking to transition his practice in one way, shape, or form, what is something from your financial point of view that they could be doing right now to move that needle? Christy mentioned, get a valuation of your practice, get a pulse on what's your practice really worth, what could you change to make it worth more. And Cecilia talked about just getting your legal documents in the right place with the right people communicated. What is your opinion on something that they could do right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, but I'll narrow it down to a few things. I would say getting an appraisal done by a broker and going to someone like Christy, that's a great first place to start. How they evaluate and look at financials may differ than how a bank looks at it, right? So also get those financials in front of a banker, a practice-specific banker, right, and have them review. Let them give you an opinion of what they're seeing. Pre-qualification gets thrown around a lot. Underwriting on an acquisition for an existing practice is a double-sided thing, right? So you need two parts to it to really make sense of the analysis. So if you just have the practice, have someone that knows what they're looking at and could put some industry standard placeholders for a type of buyer that you may see, and see what they may be able to lend. The bank's job is not to assess value, right? I get asked that all the time, like, hey, do you think this practice is worth this? I'm like, it's not my job to sit here and tell you what a practice is worth, but I can tell you what based on cash flow and based on your financial needs as a buyer, I can tell you what we can lend on this. Oftentimes the quality of the financials impacts the value. So and what I mean by that is, doctor may feel like they have $1 million practice and they're taking home 400,000 plus, right? But when we see the financials, there may be some creative accounting the CPA has done, and so we don't see that on paper, right? And if there's if too much of the cash flow and profit is just hidden within the overhead, that makes it problematic for a bank. So if the faster you get that in front of a qualified lender, then it gives you time to work that out with your accounting to make sure that your financials are as transparent as possible.
Wonderful. So the first thing that people need to do is contact all three of you and get this stuff going. Christy, do you have any last things to add to this conversation before we close?
Sure. The process of selling your practice is an emotional one. It's a roller coaster. It's up and down. Sometimes it can be smooth and easy, but there's lots of parts of this escrow process, from even starting the valuation to listing the practice to finding that right buyer to going into what I called all the different deal killers along the way. The lease can blow it up. Underwriting might not approve it. Due diligence consultant might come in and tear it to shreds. And it's an up and down process. It's an emotional decision for the seller and for the buyer. And it can be a little bit charged sometimes. So I want everyone to be prepared for that when they enter into this journey. But you got to start now. I would much rather sell your practice when I don't need to sell your practice than when there's an emergency and we have to sell it and there's a time frame. So just prepare, look at that lease, get that valuation done, and be ready for what's to come.
Thank you. Cecilia?
Yeah, definitely. I would say lease, know what's in your lease, how it's going to impact how when you transfer the lease, are the renewal options transferable? If you have an exclusivity clause in your lease agreement, is that going to be transferable? Or is there a redevelopment clause in your lease? Is there that can basically gives the landlord like 30 to 60 days to terminate your lease because they want to redevelop the shopping center, because that can kill your ability to sell your practice. Your continuing liability under the lease. So have an expectation as a seller that you are going to have a little bit of continuing liability under the lease. You can't expect that you're going to be released the moment you sell and transfer your lease, because unfortunately the landlord doesn't want to be the one holding the bag if your buyer defaults and not able to pay rent. But at the same time, how long will you continue to be liable under a lease? That's negotiable. That can be negotiated, by hopefully by your attorney. So have the right people on your team, people who have dental specific knowledge to help you, whether it's to sell or purchase your practice, and even if you own your real estate, have a clear plan of what your plan is with the real estate. Most buyer is going to want to expect to be able to purchase your real estate in the near future, right? And to be able to get a right of first refusal or option to purchase in the distant future, even if you don't plan to sell right away. So have a plan in place, whether it's you own the real estate or whether you have a lease. Know what's in your lease, know what your plan is with respect to the real estate, and have the right advisors on your team. You should be and have a trust in place, and you should be in a good position.
This is a lot more complex than we may think, isn't it? Peter, do you have any last words for us, man?
No, I mean, I think this was amazing, and I think we touched on all the big things. I would say if anybody's starting or getting into a practice, start it with the end in mind, with with everything we're talking about. I think people don't do that enough when they get into partnerships or a space sharing situation or having one entity for multiple locations, or these are all things that may sound convenient and great when you're starting out, but down the line, it can impact you selling or devaluing your practice. So I always, when I talk to new potential owners, I always tell them like, hey, it's, think about what things will look like down the line, right? And set things up so it helps your practice, right? And increases the value. So.
Well, that's great stuff, man. And it's great to have people like you three to be able to guide dentists who don't know much about what we're talking about, especially when we're starting out. Thank you for guiding so many dentists to success and contributing to the industry, contributing to us being able to help as many people as we can. And I think dentistry is amazing. I think we have a bright future, and we just need to be smart about it. So for all of you guys who are attending, if you'd like to get in touch with with Cecilia, with Christy, with Peter, we'll be emailing out their contact information within the next little bit. Please reach out to them, ask questions on what they talked about tonight, because
There's a question in the chat box.
Is there?
Yes.
Right on. Does anyone know the averages regarding how many owner doctors are selling to DSOs versus private buyers in San Diego? So how many percentage of practices are selling to private buyers versus DSO? Does anybody know that?
Cecilia, what would you think?
I can only speak on the transactions I work on. But that in no way is a real statistic.
Right.
But I would say about probably 10 to 15% of my transactions are selling to DSOs versus private buyers.
I'd say about the same.
Yeah. But again, that's not a real statistic. It's just based on what I see and the transactions that I work on.
That's lower. That's lower than you would think. I mean, just when you hear about when you hear the noise, you would think that would be higher. So that's cool. I think there's nothing better than a mentor-mentee relationship between a seller and a buyer, or a associate and an owner doctor, and there's nothing better in that growth and that transition of leadership. So I'm glad that that's low. Right on. Well, thank you guys so much. I hope you guys have a Merry Christmas and love to your families. And thank you so much for being on here tonight, taking the time here just before bedtime to be with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Landon, for organizing. This was fantastic.
Thanks, guys. This was fun.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good rest of the week.
All right. You guys as well.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.